Good morning again. At the beginning, allow me a technical information. Since the Security Council meeting is still on, so for a while we will work without the translation. I hope you all agree, because we insisted to have this meeting at 10 o'clock. I know that everybody is busy. We have a busy agenda, so in respecting the presence of our briefers also, we decided to be at 10. So now allow me to start our meeting. Excellencies, dear ministers, dear briefers, distinguished panelists, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you again for being with us today. It is a great pleasure to welcome you at the Arria Formula meeting dedicated to protecting children born of sexual violence in conflict zones. I would like to welcome the excellent briefers we have with us today, but also I would like to thank our co-sponsors of the meeting, our close partners from the Security Council, Bolivia and France, and upcoming member Germany. At the Security Council and more broadly at the United Nations, we are forced to face human tragedies every day. Yet it's difficult to think of a more tragic situation than the one faced by innocent children suffer not only discrimination, but also the most extreme forms of stigma by their families and their communities. They are often denied nationality, excluded from school, deprived of medical treatment, and subjected to physical violence, only because they were born of sexual violence. They are much victims of sexual violence as their mothers. And still, the need for protection of children born of sexual violence has never received adequate attention from the international community, including the Security Council. Therefore, Poland is very proud to bring this issue to the attention of the Security Council activities. The voices of children are not being heard during policy discussions on post-conflict recovery, peace building, and transnational justice, and their needs are not taken into account when discussions are made about who should receive aid or psychosocial support. This policy and protection gaps means that in many cases, children born of sexual violence are being left behind with negative consequences not only to themselves and their families, but to their whole communities. Children living on the margin of society due to being abandoned or stigmatized are also more susceptible to recruitment, radicalization, trafficking, and exploitation, with wider implications for national and regional peace and security. The question of children born of rape and other forms of sexual exploitation is a new phenomenon. That is why today I would like to invite all of us to look for the best policies, practices, and lessons learned to address the stigmatization and denial of rights for children born out of sexual violence in order to prevent others suffering the same fate. Excellencies, distinguished guests, distinguished panelists, I would like to give the floor to our friend, distinguished Special Representative of the Secretary General for Sexual Violence and Conflict, Ms. Pramila Patten. I admire her tireless work and dedication, which is bringing attention to the question of the plight of children born of sexual violence. I would like to thank the Special Representative and also her office for your valuable assistance in organizing today's event. The floor is yours, Madam.
Good morning to everyone. I would like to thank Ambassador Veronica of the Republic of Poland and the ambassadors of Bolivia, France, and Germany for organizing this event and for bringing the spotlight on a largely neglected group of victims, children born of wartime rape. These children are acutely vulnerable and face unique, immediate, and long-term risk linked to being born in circumstances of rape in conflict. Across geographic and culturally diverse conflicts and post-conflict situations, children born of rape face great social stigma. They are described as carriers of the deviant genes and are often marginalized and rejected within and outside families and exposed to a range of physical, psychosocial, economic, cultural, and legal risks and harms, which include infanticide, abandonment at birth, statelessness, stigmatization and discrimination, physical violence and emotional abuse, reduced or no access to education, food insecurity, poverty, homelessness, recruitment to armed or criminal groups, enhanced risk of radicalization, and poor health. A global protection risk exists for children born of wartime rape, with both national and international policymakers having largely overlooked their protection needs and indeed their existence. For example, in Rwanda, the law governing the Fund for Support and Assistance to Survivors of the Genocide against the Tutsi did not recognize children born of rape during the genocide amongst those entitled for relief assistance given to needy survivors. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Iraq, and many other countries, a child cannot be registered without the father's name. Even in Colombia, the only country with a law formally recognizing children born of sexual violence as official victims of the conflict, in practice, such rights have proved more illusory than real. To date, not a single child born of rape in Colombia has received reparations. And to a significant extent, we saw how the shame and stigma faced by both children and their mothers turned out to be a very powerful silencer. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the absence of a clear normative framework offers no guidance or external scrutiny of states' failures to assume their primary obligations towards such children. In the meantime, lost childhoods become precarious adulthoods. Human rights' claim to universality becomes an illusion, and children born of sexual violence continue to be left behind. In IDP camps in Maiduguri, in Goma, in Darfur, and in protection of civilian sites in South Sudan, I met with several women with their babies born of rape, and I saw firsthand how these mothers and their children are set on a trajectory of poverty and discrimination, violence and mounting obstacles to living a life of dignity. I understood better how the fate of these children is inextricably linked to their mothers. In Maiduguri, northeast of Nigeria, I met young girls who had been released from captivity with their babies. Having been born in captivity and not knowing their father's identity, these children do not have birth registration documents. The mothers shared with me how they and their children were subjected to constant abuse by other IDPs living in the camp on account of their association with Boko Haram. In Iraq, the women shared with me their pain and agony, having had no choice than to abandon their children. All the religious leaders confirmed to me that under no circumstance the children would be accepted by the community. In Cox's Bazar, I met with pregnant women who were very distressed about their pregnancy and expressed great apprehension about issues such as birth registration procedures. In Bosnia and Herzegovina, I met with adult children born from rape, and I realize the extent to which they suffer as a result of their mother's own missed opportunities, stigmatization, social exclusion, and discrimination. Clearly, because of this initial because of the initial violations against the mothers have gone unaddressed and unacknowledged, there has been a cascade of harms and stigma and hardship have passed from mother to child in an intergenerational cycle of denial of rights and dignity, vulnerability, abuse, and marginalization. It was my mission in Bosnia which prompted me to focus this year's commemoration of the International Day for the Elimination of Sexual Violence in Conflict on the plight and rights of children born of wartime rape. I invited Alan, a young man from Bosnia, born from rape, to share his moving life story of rejection and stigmatization. Since, through UN Action Network on Sexual Violence in Conflict, my office is funding with UNICEF a project entitled Coordinated Action to Respond to the Needs of Children Born of Rape, Children Born to ISIL Fighters, and their survivor mothers. Another project is being implemented in Bosnia and Herzegovina for survivors of sexual violence and their children born of rape. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I have met Rohingya children in camps in Cox's Bazar. I have also visited shelters full of abandoned children in Iraq. Neglecting this generation will create new isolated groups on the fringes of society that will make them susceptible to indoctrination of future terrorist groups. This issue needs to be addressed now so we can prevent those children from becoming the seeds that feed terrorist ideology. This continuing phenomenon of children born as a result of rape in armed conflict areas has all the basic ingredients that foster the cycle of terrorism. The children are forced into a life of isolation because there are no policies or institutional mechanisms that allow those children to integrate back into the societal fabric. The security risks are too great to continue to be ignored. An entire generation of children will be considered outcast and forced to live on the margins of society or forge together social ingredients that foster the vicious cycle of terrorism. I would like to conclude with a few recommendations. Firstly, the perceived issue of a lack of data should not constitute a barrier to policy making for children born of sexual violence. Comprehensive figures will never be available. Over-reliance on quantitative data to measure the size and urgency of this problem will ensure that children born of sexual violence remain politically invisible. Nor should concerns around fear of breaking protective silences about children's birth origins and generating stigma by singling them out as a group in need of policy attention be a barrier. There are positive examples of active policy making for other groups of stigmatized children, such as those living with HIV. We must ensure legal recognition of children born of rape as victims. Meaningful and inclusive peace and reconciliation cannot be achieved if a group of persons is excluded or marginalized in post-conflict societies, policies, and laws. Transitional justice processes must recognize and enforce the rights of children born of sexual violence, which should encompass truth, reconciliation, accountability, and the delivery of transformative reparations. It is urgent that in contexts like Nigeria, Iraq, or Myanmar, amongst others, that governments put in place special birth registration procedures and exceptions for children born in captivity to protect these children from being stateless. States must fully comply with their legally binding obligations under the Convention on the Rights of the Child and the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination against Women in protecting the rights of these children. States must adopt a holistic response with the protection risk viewed through the joint lens of gender-based discrimination and children's rights. Lastly, strategic engagement of religious and traditional leaders to alleviate the stigma and support for the reintegration of mothers and their children to their communities is critical. Madam Chair, in conclusion, I would like to say that bridging the global protection gap and remedying this human rights failure is critical to achieving dignity, meaningful and inclusive peace, reconciliation, and justice for all. I believe that with our support, with your support, children born of rape in war can survive and thrive. They can overcome the horrific circumstances of their birth and have the hope of a brighter future in which they are treated with the dignity and respect they deserve and their human rights respected and protected. Thank you.
I thank the Special Representative for this important and inspiring statement. And now I have the honor to give the floor to Mr. Omar Abdi, the Deputy Director Executive of UNICEF. We would not have this discussion today without hearing about the important work, in particular the work in the field which UNICEF does. Mr. Director, I give you the floor, please.
Thank you, Excellency, for your leadership and for convening this meeting today to discuss this particularly timely and important topic. Children born of rape are a particular concern and priority for UNICEF. We must all work towards ending both the violence and the terrible stigma that it carries for survivors and their children. Addressing gender-based violence in emergencies broadly is one of UNICEF's programming priorities. Our programs include addressing the situation of children born of rape, including conflict-related sexual violence. UNICEF does also in several contexts that I will come back to shortly. But before I address programming, I wish to highlight some of the real challenges and at times dangers that these children and their mothers face day in and day out. It is difficult to confirm the scale of the phenomenon, as the SRSG said. Unknown numbers of unregistered children born of rape and their mothers are living in hiding, not coming forward due to stigma and fear, including fear of retributory violence or so-called honor killing. This population already faces huge protection risks that are compounded by their need to hide. For example, stigma from families and communities often leads to expulsion and abandonment of mothers, threatening their very survival. In some places, extreme stigma has led to violence, including renewed sexual violence, restriction on their movements, and denial of services. And of course, all of this is made worse if the mother and child are perceived in any way to be linked directly or indirectly to an armed group. I also want to highlight how challenging it is to provide safe services to these women and children. As in general, for gender-based violence services across humanitarian settings, assistance is rarely given the priority it deserves. And yet, if we are to support their healing, their mental and physical health, as well as their social integration, we must have these support mechanisms in place. Judicial and prosecution processes are often weak and offer little to no protection for these children, for survivors or witnesses. In some cases, service providers themselves have been threatened, putting themselves at risk for assisting children and families. One more barrier to children's access to basic rights, safety, and life-saving services. Finally, children born of rape often cannot access birth registration and nationality identity cards, which they need to access basic services, including aid and education, which further increases their vulnerability. Despite all these challenges, UNICEF and partners strive to provide protection and to support the healing of these survivors and the children born of the violence they have survived. For more than a decade, we have been at the forefront of GBV in emergency efforts globally. We are expanding our efforts to reduce the risk of gender-based violence and to provide support to survivors. We have increased the number of people reached from over 400,000 girls, boys, and women in 2014 to 3.6 million in 2017. As an agency, we focus on providing survivors and their children with 1, life-saving services, including health, psychosocial, and safety services. For example, in Nigeria, over 4,700 women and girls have received services just in the last 6 months. And UNICEF supported 75 children born of sexual violence to integrate into their communities after facing rejection by their families and communities. Second, UNICEF also works on reducing risks of GBV across sectors and interventions. For example, in Iraq, we are currently implementing a project in partnership with UNAMI, and thanks to the funding from the SRSG's office and from UN Action, a project aimed at finding solutions to the complex challenges linked to children born of rape. A review of the national legal and regulatory framework to identify laws, regulations, policies, and practices related to civil documentation and registration for children born of rape or in ISIL-controlled territory and their mothers, including marriage and birth registration, has been completed to determine safe entry points for action. And finally, UNICEF tackles GBV and challenges faced by children born of rape by addressing the social norms that promote violence against women and girls and the stigmatization of survivors. For example, in Somalia and South Sudan, we have piloted a prevention program called Communities Care with remarkable results. Working with individuals, families, and communities, we are identifying the norms that lead to harmful beliefs, attitudes, and violent acts towards women and children, and working to transform these attitudes to create safer and healthier communities. In Somalia, the program led to more than 22% reduction in social norms that support protecting family honor through violence or rejections. In some parts of South Sudan, that reduction was almost 42%. Despite these promising approaches, we all have much work to do. We must commit to ensuring that successful programs that address stigma and rejection, such as the ones I described in Somalia and South Sudan, are systematically implemented across all emergency settings. We must also commit with action, not just words, to increasing resources and commitment to GBV services in the field so that we finally address this problem at the scale that it warrants from the onset of emergencies. Ladies and gentlemen, let's work together towards this goal, and we look forward to our discussion today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Director, for your valuable remarks. And now, due to the difference time, I would like to turn to our briefer in Juba via teleconference, Ms. Betty Sunday Kute. She's coordinator of Women Monthly Forums and will share with us the experience and her perspective. Please, Betty, the floor is yours.
Excellence and distinguished guests, thank you for inviting me to brief you on the topic of children born of war, which is the most unrecognized and stigmatized topic in the world, and especially in a country like South Sudan. My name is Betty Sunday. I'm a medical doctor and human rights activist. I've been working as the coordinator of the Women Monthly Forum in South Sudan. I've joined you today to bring the voice of thousands of victims I work for. South Sudanese women and girls are routinely subjected to sexual violation. One of the key subsequences in many cases is unwanted pregnancy and subsequent children birth of war. who is in the eyes of the community are seen as a bad blood, or the enemy child to children. Children born of war are subsequently rejected by their families, communities, because they are perceived as a bad disown, bringing disown to the family. This year has been a year of doom for the women and girls of South Sudan, as they have been continuously targeted for sexual violence. In the case of my work, I have had histories from women whom their family have been betrayed, raped, and sometimes killed after being violated. Those attacks often take places while women and girls are performing basically livelihood activity like collecting water, food, firewood, and even when seeking for safety place with their families. There is no safe place for women in South Sudan where there is ongoing conflict even after the signing of the revitalized peace agreement. Stigma is a hard concern. Mothers are not only after to report rape, but they are also afraid to report their pregnancy, as it will put their life in future danger and destroy their children's life. Because of the trauma and stigma, some mothers are forced to abandon their children as they do not want to suffer the consequence of having a war child. Children born of war in South Sudan are also exposed to rejection, stigma, physically and psychologically abuse. They also are at a risk growing up in violence environment, increasing their chance to replicate such violence model and behaviors. This perpetuates a cycle of revenge which make any peace effort impossible in the long term. Long-term subsequences of sexual violation for South Sudanese women and girls are difficult to be predicted. Nevertheless, we need to pay great attention to children born from rape and ensure that they avoid lost generation of neglecting children growing up in abuse environment and at risk of becoming violent themselves. Children born of war to be considered as an immediate victims after their mothers has specifically intervention should be designed for them as a need and subsequence as adequate. A major challenge that face us as activists and the human rights defender in South Sudan is limited access to Arria. This prolonged ability to reach women and girls as well as their children, who desperately need our services and support. All points I've mentioned require urgent attention. Therefore, as an activist, I recommend the following actions. I and the women of South Sudan urgently call upon the parties to the conflict to respect their commitment to stop sexual violence. We call upon the government of South Sudan to address the suffering of the women and girls who are subjected to sexual violence. We want enhanced prevention measures for women and girls, emergency services including contraceptions and post-exposure products kits should be made available across the country. This is a critical measure which need to be taken as a matter of an urgent. To better understanding the needs of most women, most mothers and children, we need to improve evidence collection and our information base, specifically search on the matters, would be critical in clarifying the exact of the problem. We need more support and resource for such initiative about children born of war. Lastly, I want to emphasize the impact of ensuring that all gender-based violence and child protection projects take this specific group of children as in considerations when implementing this program. Thank you so much, Madam Chair.
I thank the briefer from Juba for your testimony. And now I will turn to another invitee, Ms. Evelyn Amony. She's a chairperson of the Women's Advocacy Network from Uganda. She will speak in a local language, and we will need the translation. Mr. Mark Otim will make the translation, so I will allow him to sit here to be more efficient. Please, Evelyn, the floor is yours.
No. This one. It's okay.
Amita kwan kar man me foyo to yup any.
I want to start by thanking the organizers of this event.
Amita for UN.
I want to thank the UN and the government of Poland, in particular, for inviting us here.
Kido amir foyo mon kicho weng mati atkai.
I want to thank all the ladies and gentlemen in this room.
Anya kiluona mon Evelyn.
I'm called Amony Evelyn.
Anabella tiana chiel ma work ya mak pa LRA.
I'm somebody who passed through the experience of abduction in LRA captivity.
An LRA o magana tiki maka para rio.
I was abducted by the LRA when I was just 12 years old.
Aberi ching LRA pi maka para chiel kinuchu.
I lived in LRA captivity for 11 and a half years.
Ken mak pa LRA jema polo teme kumkwana kineti rep.
So I went through a lot, including rape.
Dio latien matiri mingeti ke jem melwen.
I was forced to become a young fighter.
Pero muken ma wanoy ken reba yo bero nyual chon.
One of the challenges we face is that we gave birth to children at a very tender age.
Ma noy pe ki ker me gwahalatien.
When you even don't have the ability to look after that child.
Ki bene kwoi di lumi wachile.
You live in the bush like wild animals.
Dong per ma wan wati none machalo mege ingelwenya ye kikin pachi.
On return, we still continue facing challenges in the communities.
Chimutok tie.
There's a lot of stigma we go through.
Kilua wanya nywa dwi kilui gorilla jima papat ki por kere chalo we pe beru dano.
There's a lot of name calling. We are given all sorts of names, including called rebels, gorillas, and so on.
Chimutok eoni pogiri komwan ke kanwa komliter ma wadugu kere.
The stigma and discrimination is not only on us, the young women, but in particular our children.
Litiano ti no peka de day school. No, walu fuenya be chimutogi. Kata latian mo timo gimo maraj nyoti o mabewa en wija dwini. Ke tam ke latiano kar mabe fute ke duako ke por wie woru bere la lueng.
Even at school, the children are discriminated upon. They are always reminded of their past, not only by fellow children at school, but even including some teachers who tell them or remind them that, you know, you are children of rebels. As a result, many of them drop out of school.
Community ki rapping gen gi wachi wor na yang beno rapping nyara an bena be rapping in me chulo wa e pe ngeni leta dugi kom wan mege ma wadugo kiliteno.
Young girls especially are most affected when they drop out of school. They are sometimes abused even in the communities who take a retaliatory approach saying, look, your parents in the past abused us, so it's an opportunity for us now to also abuse you.
Inoni chwe chwin meta mere kom wan migiliteno piano weri waki komo kwar walu nyori wa kwar wa piliteno ane ni watiara ngamo beru won latien ento LRA pegitita dani ana ake kaka makita eni.
We face a lot of rejection in the communities, and you know, when you're in captivity, sometimes the LRA use pseudonyms, and so the fathers of these children don't tell you, they give you their true identity of where they come from. That's why, as Women's Advocacy Network, we try to support other young mothers to try and trace the origin or the paternal lineage where these children come from, as this is always very crucial, especially in Uganda and in Acholi.
Kero ng'eyo kere lweny me Uganda ter mwaka piero ma chier piero adek. Kere bedi kombe chani koko pala duro ling Uganda. Winyo ni LRA futi ka mete ka munyo. Te loke ni lu duro ling ato fut je ma pol titime. Dan ma pol fut gu rueny. Kare me lweny li tiano ma tiano. Mon ma fut pia gu dugu pa jo duan dada.
Even if the guns are fallen down following the over 20 years of conflict in northern Uganda, many things happened. For instance, during active fighting, many children went missing during active combat, and we don't know where they are. While I was in LRA captivity, I bore 3 children against my will. My first daughter, called Winnie, was captured during active fighting. I don't know where she is up to today. She was captured on the 28th of August, 2004. I'm still looking for her up to date, but it's not only her. Many other women went through similar experiences who lost their children during the active fighting and don't know where these children are up to date, whether they are alive or dead. Many of the children suffered physical injuries during active conflict and other forms of physical disabilities. For instance, one of my second child has an hearing problem, an hearing defect as a result of the bombs during the fighting. Even my firstborn, one of my children, also has an eye defect. Her eyes continue to pain up to today. And when she's in school, and this is affecting her performance. So she's wearing glasses, but still the problem persists.
Ketam dulma wati yeni wati mon mia beach. Eto kon wan mia beach. Dan wa du kilitian wel ma papa jomo kan du kilitian beach. Nyorni litian tima pola da magetiki pero kuri ani.
For instance, under our organization, the Women's Advocacy Network, we are about 500 women. And all these women have different number of children. Others even have 5 children. That tells you, if you multiply the number, you can see the number of children who have passed through this problem. And yet there are still many others who are not yet under our association.
Kidong para madong litiano tinone, pian kombecha litiano damu kanong tibino maka piario. Kinano kalsa pa chuli nyorni latiano miorberi kaka pa wone. Eto komberi chawani, inoni kero pema wek ini non kere kaka pa latiane. Ti jomo kama pia wano kaka kikome. No latian mior ti moga matiano tiano luako bampa dano, chiarka yue guru. Ti moga ma ke nyuari ke wati le moga mare ni yunu pi be beru pi we babani. Chi noni latian tika da ma twinyo ngape ki du ki gere kom lunyoro.
As you know, in our community, and especially actually, children are identified from the paternal lineage. And so as they grow up from, say, the mother's side, they continue facing discrimination, stigma, and rejection. As a result, the children are compelled or forced to ask their mothers to show them where their fathers come from, because that's a source of inheriting land and also having an identity in the community for you to marry in future and so on, because you are able to identify with a particular clan. But because of the challenges that they are currently facing, it's very difficult for them to integrate in the community. Some of them end up leaving the homes and going to look for odd jobs, and others, children are forced to go and look for work even at a tender age, and the phenomenon of child, forced labor is really ongoing as well.
Kibena geno kana kumbecha amalo kalitiano mukana akemu biona kalwenyi kom la nyode mukana giti prison kumbecha ama biona ena wa litiana dek magati prison maluka ki akemu manogo nyoro pian ke penyo no wachi chunye chue pingo en kinywale ki lum eto kar latian e one penyin machalo men latian me wane ana nywale in ki rapping ana wa nywale in pe yot waje ke latian la chone an ki rapping adwi rapping an wa nywale in no toro chunyo nyoro bene.
Given the circumstances of the birth of these children in our culture is often seen as a taboo. So the mothers sometimes have difficulty of how to explain to the children the circumstances of their birth because it results in stigma. And some of these children sometimes become violent on their own mothers in an attempt to force or compel their mothers to tell them their true identity and where their fathers come from. And also wanting to know how comes that they were born actually in the bush. And it's something very difficult that the women face in terms of explaining this situation to their children. Some have become violent. As we talk, when she was coming, 3 children are actually in prison because of violence against their mothers under such circumstances.
Kiki no kanema litiano no tekge to 12 piane ka paneo culture pachuli yana tiana cho mier bed gangu paneo gi wayo ki wechini gangu pare ki bene komberi cha ni Uganda lo ke naso ID ubino ka penge o karani ti kamu kana ma penye ni kwaro nyenga wa wan mege be no pe wange ni kwala tene nyenga agikana la tien pe no naso ID.
For instance, many of the children are growing from their maternal sides. When you look at the national registration process for you to get the national ID, normally there are questions asked about your father's side. And given the fact that sometimes the mothers have limited information or no knowledge about the father's background, you find that many of them are missing out on the national registration process.
Kawa dakong maturi lokom Kita Women Advocacy Network tiyu kwere wan wakwero matut mingeo kwene kanya ganga la tiye wakupe ki joma ke mahoge.
For instance, one of the things that we are doing as the Women's Advocacy Network is child tracing. We are trying to help the young mothers or the children try to find where their identity is. We work with the local leaders and other community leaders and former fighters to try and understand or try to link up these children to their families.
Gino miyo watimo kirami kwetu matut pian yade deni dule mapol gu konyo menene latien mono dakanyo akiye ete noni latien eni po o kanya mier cherie pian peki kupe ki victims ki kome wan wanoni tuari kupe ki ngan moni make makoni ki Arria moni para wang meno kom kaka palatien eoni.
That's why through our work, we do a lot of investigation. We go in depth, even if there were attempts in the past to integrate some of the children through different organizations. But we go in depth to have dialogue and really find out the actual truth around the child's circumstance to facilitate the reintegration process.
Kibene gino kane ma watimo wachwalo lok eni radio watimo radio talk show work community kungeni program enitie.
We also run radio programs about this work of tracing the children so that the community members are aware of what is going on.
Kibene komberi chama ana lok tilite an mo kama gere foot pia wano gaengi ki come ento foot wati process mod angeni oloto wabe no kaka bene.
We are still continuing with this work to try and help trace the whereabouts of the children's families. And this is an ongoing activity that under our organization we are doing.
Kibeliti an mapol bino bara mego yen machali won kom ne ngeu kwene kanya olotone tiki nge ne winyo kwene kanya babana akiye me kombe chama ana lo katikiliti ana para chiel matika gwak ne waber ke dika chiel pian mukano ki bod mama go bino bara ajolo ge waber ke ge nywako ke ditame wek Olutogu ngeni pegeti kengi, olutingata mama tikchok kedge.
As I talk, I have about 11 children under my care who came and are trying to trace their identity, their paternal identity. So we provide them various forms of support, as well as we get referrals from fathers who are trying to also to look for where their children are, just like mothers also trying to look for where the paternal, lineage of their children is. So we provide this kind of support.
Tije mukan macha mukan watimu wek no wigi bo wil ki gang chao kane waturo ka chiel ikene mukan yupu jemo mateno teno chala yupu pepa gi afonyo gi kirmi yupu tiako olu wek wilu wigi pe cha weng no bere ka penyo la penya chiela chi ayenyi yu moni wek no olu to ngeni pe ti kene.
Yeah, we also provide various support. We engage the children in other activities, for instance, making beads and other activities, so that they shouldn't all the time be thinking about their, past bad experiences, and really focus on things that can make their future better.
Kibene wachoy report maluka ki cell tracing report en man eni tijmo wabere ka timone timwakario ni weng tikany rom niang ki ye matote.
For instance, our work is best described, some of our work. I have a book that we wrote which describes some of the work we are doing in this direction of child tracing. It's available online, and one can download and read it.
Kibena tiki vukanya a choice story na me work with lobo ku nge right palwen kibene kinge ngo ki ko mutime kwa na karma tibot elare pian ka wachini a tiet story na noni ne ma tini wadire no furati ter story na pera kana chi ma pera teke a choy vuka I am Evelyn Amony eni genu a ki kwa na ki kome kibene ngo ma neno ki bot elare wa choy tikan.
Given the experiences that we went through, if I was given an opportunity, I would have spoken here the whole day. But given the limited time, my story is in my book, which is titled Evelyn Amony. It's available in major bookstores, which goes in detail to talk about my experience and the experience of children, what they went through in LRA captivity. And you're free to get a copy.
Kibena meta wechi wuni mono kere beti gen marajo time kwana frati ki gen ni oloto a nyim twer bere mabe ka wa mako chingwa ki mon mo kana mi lewe ma papat mon ma per me lwenyo wori kom ki mo kana pe per me lwenyo wori kom ni furwa twer ke la yu ai lobo kolo me lobo ko ngeni maka nyira ter na ilum diyo gi me belu lwenyo eni gen marajo da ki rapping.
I think also this opportunity is very useful for me to rally all people of goodwill and member states to come collectively to condemn this act of forced abduction and forced marriage of young women that results in this phenomena, which must be stopped wherever it is happening in this world. And I call upon you to come together to make sure that we end this vice.
Kibela mero wera UN ki UNICEF ki dule ma papat ma gi yele menane gi luko ko lwen nyo kir ma mier lwen ko gi kwere alege woni wi po wi le fule te an mo kana ti lum ti an ma pol futi bot elare ti an ma pol pe o kanya mier go o yela bole jo mo kana o ga ko Sudan jo mo kana ti Central jo mo kana ti Congo pe o Uganda lega na ma dit tieni o konywa wan ma chalo victim menane oluto kuchudugi kwawa ngol matio time.
I also want to urge and call upon the UN and member states that this phenomena has not ended. In Uganda, still there are missing children. Others are in either South Sudan, others are in Central Africa or in the Congo, who want to be assisted so that these children are brought back home in Uganda. And so I'll appeal to you, don't give up, continue supporting us so that we can make the world a better, safe place for all of us.
Fire.
Thank you for listening.
Evelyn, thank you very much for this very human testimony. We appreciate very much your remarks. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now the translation. I thank you in advance, our colleagues, interpreters. So I think it's still 12 o'clock or 12:15. Allow me now to move to our third civil society speaker, Ms. Charo Mina-Rojas, the briefer from Human Rights and International Working Group of Proceso de Comunidades Negras, who will speak about her perspective coming from Bolivia. Please, Charo, you have the floor.
Oh, perfect. Greetings and thank you, Madam Ambassador and the Special Representative, for this opportunity to speak on this critical issue. My name is Charo Mina-Rojas, and I am part of the Black Communities Proceso de Comunidades Negras in Colombia, a network or grassroots organization of individuals and collectives united for the defense of human rights, including collective, territorial, and territorial rights of Afro-descendant people in Colombia. Colombia certainly have very important lessons to learn from all the issues that we are discussing here. For instance, Colombia has taken very important legal steps toward the recognizing of sexual violence as a crime against humanity and formulating some special measures to assist and repair its victims, including children born out of rape. The Colombian Constitutional Court deserves also particular recognition for its active and continuous ruling for the Colombian government to meaningful act. And of course, there is an organized civil society working and advocating for the rights of children, constantly working toward the recognition of the rights of children. However, as Madame Zainab Bangura, the UN Special Representative on Sexual Violence and Conflict, stated after her visit to Colombia in 2015, the main challenge is how to turn the resolve into tangible solutions in communities where this crime continues to occur, as very well the Special Representative stated earlier. She particularly called on Colombian authorities to end the silence and impunity surrounding sexual violence and its consequences. Sadly, despite these important advances in legal framework, silence and impunity continue to characterize the response to sexual violence in Colombia, and many barriers prevent survivors, mothers, as well as children from the legally mandated reparations. One of those serious barriers to reparations, is stigmatization. Children born from the U.S. troops present in Colombia during implementation of the U.S. Policy Plan Colombia from 2000 to 2003, many born out of unreported rape, are known in the port city of Buenaventura as the children of Plan Colombia. Likewise, the children whose fathers perpetrators were or are paramilitaries are identified in some areas as paraquitos. Women also face, as well as we all very well know, multiple forms of stigmatization based on their economic condition, situation of displacement, race, or ethnicity that add to the factor of being a victim of sexual violence and pregnant, or having a child that is the product of rape. The fear of mothers to pass the stigma to their children, be rejected or judged by them, or cause to them further pain and shame, has frequently prevented women from reporting rape and the identity of the perpetrator fathers. Without being reported, neither the woman nor the child will receive the benefit of the present regulations and measures that we have in Colombia. Services for victims of rape and children born out of rape are very limited, especially in rural or remote areas, and even in large cities, not all victims have access to those services. In addition to rape, many survivors suffer reproductive violence stemming in part from a lack of access to reproductive health services. Furthermore, government institutions such as the Victim Unit or the Colombian Family Welfare Institute fails to account for cultural and ethnicity and thus fail to meet the specific needs of indigenous and Afro-descendant survivors. To this lack of differential approach is added the lack of financial resources allocated to these entities at the local and regional levels, especially for services for indigenous and Afro-descendant people. In consequence, mothers and children survivors of sexual violence don't receive adequate sustained psychological assistance, and due to fear, not even spiritual relief as important as this is to certain cultures. Thus, the lack of available resources to bring attention to survivors of sexual violence is another great limitation to the implementation of the important legal framework and programs in Colombia. It is important also to identify that great inequalities, economic, gender, and racial gaps among Colombia's society, as well as gender and racial prejudice, also played an important role in the exclusion of survivors of sexual violence from vulnerable sectors such as poor, indigenous, and Black Afro-descendant women from access to services, justice, and reparations. Racial and economic inequalities are a third factor of limitation that Colombian state must address to take laws and programs translate into meaningful protection of victims, including children. In the context of post-peace agreement, the lack of state presence in certain regions of Colombia and the tendency to militarize instead of provide humanitarian security is extremely concerning as it fuels the vulnerability of women and girls to sexual violence and its consequences. Due to recurrent silence, impunity, and inadequate documentation and systematization of cases, it is not possible for the government to evaluate or respond to the magnitude of the situation of sexual violence in zones where the internal armed conflict has reignited. Further barriers for mother and children survivors to access to justice are the current administration threats to the special jurisdiction for peace. While the special jurisdiction for peace is beginning to process cases, proposals to eliminate Article 213, which contains provisions obligating the system to refer victims of sexual gender-based violence to healthcare systems, threaten to diminish its ability to address the needs of survivors of sexual gender-based violence. Without the government's political will to fully support the special jurisdiction system and to respect its autonomy, survivors fear that access to truth, justice, and reparations will become pure rhetoric. In conclusion, more political will and accountability is needed to properly address and halt the plight of children born of war in Colombia. I would like to suggest some recommendations for the Security Council to the Colombian government. One of those will be for the Colombian government to urgently fund the UNICEF UN Women proposal to conduct an ethical, informed assessment on children born on sexual violence during Colombian conflict to promote a greater understanding of the dimensions of the protection gap and help remove barriers to implementation of reparations for children born of sexual violence under the 2011 Victims Law, the Law 1448, and Decree Laws 14635 and 14633 that address Afro-descendant and indigenous victims respectively. They ensure that children born of sexual violence and women and girls who have suffered reproductive harms, whether civilians or former combatants, are given due priority in transitional justice mechanisms and post-peace accords dialogue. And finally, ensure that ensure that safety, confidentiality, and ethical considerations are fully factored into all political, policy, and legal processes and deliver meaningful transformative reparation for both groups. Finally, develop a pedagogy and communications strategy to educate civil society, authorities, government officials, and staff on the principles and right of non-discrimination in all forms in order to attend and to prevent further stigmatization of mothers and children survivors of sexual violence. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charo, for your valuable contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to be creative and a little bit flexible. I know that we are privileged to have in the room with us two ministers, one left, unfortunately, one from Sweden, still there, and the distinguished minister from the Netherlands. So if you allow me, I will change the order because I know that Minister Wallström should leave. So if you accept, I will now give the floor to Madam Minister and we will return to our order. Please, Madam Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you very much for being so kind to let me into the speakers list before I should. Thank you very much to Poland for bringing us together to discuss this very important topic. And thank you to our briefers. And as usual, your testimonies helps us to mobilize our imagination to think about what it would be like to be abducted as a very young girl and live in the jungle for more than 10 years, 11 years, to give birth to several children, lose a child, and all of that. It is not easy, but I think that, like nobody else, you can always bring us back to reality. And what we can do is take our responsibility from the very privileged situations that we live in to make the most out of this. Evelyn, I am sure you are the most amazing mother, and I'm sure you have fantastic children. I also want to be personal and say something to Pramila Patten, because you know, SRSG, that when I took office, and I was the first SRSG on sexual violence in conflict, we came across this phenomenon in all our trips. We noticed this. And I remember particularly in one situation where there was a mother with a small boy, and she pointed to him. He was sort of a little bit far from her, and she pointed to him and said that, you know, he's called a snake baby, and I don't want to see him. I really think that he reminds me of everything that I went through, and I have a difficulty in connecting to him. And you could see that he was a neglected child. And this was not only in that situation, but in many other situations around the world. When we traveled, we saw this as a phenomenon. We were not sort of equipped or ready then to really take on this task. We saw that it would be absolutely a very important thing to do, but we had to then establish the fight against impunity and to set up all the things. So I think it's only now that we have started to see things really being done in an effective way. So I'm impressed and grateful to you for everything that you have done to make sure that this is firmly set on the agenda. We only took some small baby steps, but now it's more recognized, and it must and should be. And of course, a child needs, first of all, loving care, and that's the most important thing you carry with you. But as you have pointed out, what is needed now is that these children are legally recognized, that they are given names, surnames, and citizenship. to secure the right also of the mothers to confer their nationality on their children, and the children must be granted full human rights. Your children are our children as well. Your destiny is also our destiny. That's how the world works. And I think that this is such an important discussion that you, from the Polish side, have now also helped us to have and to move these things forward. So thank you for everything that you are doing. And I don't think that I should say so much more, but this must be a priority. And I think we have to recognize that children should always be treated primarily as victims. And that's sort of the lesson also from everything we've heard and from what we know about this situation. But we also have to talk about the women and the mothers, and to make sure that everything we can now channel in terms of resources and attention to this also goes to the mothers to help them. So I guess this will also take some money and support from now on, and full political attention from the Security Council. So once again, thank you very much to all our amazing briefers, and thank you for arranging this, and good luck also for the SRSG to continue with work on this.
Thank you, Madam Minister, for your inspiring remarks. Thank you. And now allow me to return to the order. And I have the honor to invite Mr. Mohammed Marzouk, Deputy Permanent Representative of Iraq to the United Nations, to deliver his statement. Please, you have the floor.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. First, allow me to thank the Permanent Mission of the Republic of Poland and all missions participated in convening this important area formula, which highlights the ongoing needs to find sustainable solution for those children who have been forced to experience inhuman and unspeakable horrors under the brutality of terrorists in many areas of the world. Since the rise of ISIS-Daesh in Iraq in 2014, civilians had been subjected to sexual violence. The terrorist groups targeted thousands of women and girls, enslaved and raped them. The result of those heroic actions is a number of children born of rape and forced marriage. Thus, Daesh has caused a new reality that required national and international strategy to meet the challenges emerged. Accurate number of those children remains hard to estimate because women have not reported the birth of the babies fathered by Daesh terrorists to the respective authorities to avoid stigmatization from their communities and reprisals from terrorist groups. We're highly aware that children born of rape and their mothers who had suffered sexual violence without safe houses, programs of economic empowerment and reintegration into their societies remain exposed to exploitation and recruitment by terrorist groups. If they are excluded and abandoned by their communities, and they have no other choice except to rejoin groups they have fled. Iraq believes that political commitments play a key role to tackle the phenomenon of sexual violence. In my country, we are committed to address this issue through many actions taken on national and international level. Iraq signed a joint communique with the Special Representative of Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict on 23rd September 2016, which formed the beginning of a joint action between Iraq and the United Nations in order to respond to sexual violence due to the atrocities committed by ISIS. Addressing some of the challenges facing Iraq and bringing the perpetrators to justice, as well as Iraq asks its Security Council to adopt Resolution 2279 to bring these perpetrators to justice by collecting and storing evidence of such crimes, including sexual violence. Under the agreement, Iraq enjoys international support to document and collect evidence for these crimes, strengthening the legal framework and empowering the judicial authority, finding mechanisms to compensate victims and supporting survivors and children born of rape. Based on this agreement, the relevant experts from the Office of SRSG on Sexual Violence visited Iraq twice during this period to develop joint plan implemented with relevant stakeholders in Iraq. This year, the former Prime Minister of Iraq, Dr. Haidar Abdi, extended an invitation to the Special Representative of Secretary General on Sexual Violence in Conflict to visit Iraq to finalize the implementation plan for the joint communique. The visit took place successfully during the period 25th February to 5th of March, early this year. During the visit, in addition to Prime Minister and his cabinet, Ms. Patten met with religious leaders and stakeholders. Moreover, the implementation plan for the joint communique and the opening of a safe shelter, which is the first experience in Baghdad to establish a battered women's shelter, was launched. Iraq continues to cooperate with the team of experts on the identification and prioritization of ISIS-related sexual violence cases for investigation and prosecution and improve survivors' access to justice. Also cooperates with UNDP in terms of reconciliation and rebuilding in the liberated areas from terrorist groups to enable women and their children return home and empower them economically to provide a solid protection against recruitment and radicalization of children. In this regard, the government of Iraq highly appreciates the great role and constructive cooperation of the Office of SRSG on Sexual Violence in assisting Iraq, especially at this stage after the liberation of all Iraqis' area from the terrorist groups. Finally, we thank all partners that have actively contributed and supported Iraq in defeating terrorism and countries who are willing to contribute in implementation of the joint communique for the sake of children born of rape and their mothers. I thank you.
Thank you very much for your valuable contribution, and allow me to say that our discussion would not be complete without looking at the problem of Rohingya community. So I very much appreciate that the Deputy Permanent Representative of Bangladesh kindly accepted our invitation. Mr. Tarek, you have the floor. Tarek Islam, please.
Thank you, Madam. Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me begin by appreciating Poland for taking the lead in hosting, arranging this event, and also our thanks go to Bolivia, France, and Germany for bringing us together here. I would also like to appreciate the SRSG for her moving account. She has seen it all in different parts of the world, including the situation of the Rohingya camps in Cox's Bazar. We are also moved by the personal account of Ms. Evelyn, which is very moving to say the least, but most importantly, her account also fully corroborates what the other briefers have said, the reality, the practicalities, and the need for addressing the issue in full earnest. All the briefers have adequately focused on the risks of not having any global protection regime as of now, the lack of assistance to the victims, the reparation and all those issues. I won't go into those things. But it would be remiss of me if I do not mention UNICEF's work, the good work they have been doing for the victims and the society beyond. But we all need to remind ourselves that this has to be scaled up. It has to be, there has to be joined up collective effort by the international community. In our case, before I go into the Rohingya issue, I may recall, which is very relevant to this particular topic we are dealing with, because, you know, we had our independence struggle in 1971. And in that bloody independence struggle, there were, there's a conservative estimate or statistic that 200,000 women were violated by the occupation forces. So one can imagine how large could be the number of children born out of these mothers. And in particular in a war-ravaged country, how difficult it would be for the country to address this issue when we were just coming out from the ashes of the war. Now we have another issue which the Madam Chair has rightly pointed out, that after the August 2016 incident, we are having a huge influx of Rohingyas coming from the Rakhine state of Myanmar. Now, 700,000 plus, and altogether it's 1.1 million. And alarming part of it is that a significant number of these Rohingyas who have come are women. Many of them have been raped. There are eyewitness accounts. Many children have been born already, and there are also a large number of expecting mothers. The SRSG had seen it herself. And unfortunately, due to the social stigma and all the challenges that these mothers face, many of them, very unfortunate though, are desperate to go for, self-inflicted feticide. So, which is another very difficult issue to deal with. We are definitely struggling with the registration, what to do with these babies. So as we try to work out this, I think the Myanmar also has to address this issue in addition to ensuring safe, dignified, and sustainable return of the Rohingyas back to Myanmar in their abode. From our side, we are doing whatever we can do with our modest means, and it's encouraging, and we are very happy that we have recently concluded a framework of cooperation with SRH's office for addressing the need of the victims, and I think that would be a good entry point for specific targeted intervention of the international community to address the plight of these hapless mothers and hapless children. So we particularly urge upon the Security Council to remain sensitized to this particular aspect as it continues to deliberate on the situation of Myanmar in the Council. I fully agree what the other briefers have referred to, the recommendations, the challenges, and particularly the recommendations they have made. And definitely, we feel we would need a global normative framework to address the plights, rights, and needs of these children born out of sexual violence in conflict situation. And we hope that this kind of meeting and perhaps many other meetings we expect to take place will crystallize the global resolve to have a global norm-setting exercise leading to a global framework or kind of thing that we may pursue. The framework essentially need to have those what have already been said, the support mechanism, the issue of reparation, the accountability and justice, as well addressing the protection gaps. We also need the political will, which is very important among the countries who are dealing with this issue, who are host to these issues, to have adequate political willingness to address in full earnest. And above all, I think this also has to be a kind of bottom-up approach. There has to be all the efforts have to be underpinned by a whole of society approach. The society has to re-embrace these mothers and these children back into the society. The societal awareness is something very important, and we have to create that space within the society to reintegrate them. Otherwise, the problem will continue to persist. No solution will be adequate in the long run. Prevention of conflict is another important tool, so we do not have the conflict in the first place. The Secretary General Sustaining Peace Agenda need to be pursued in this regard. And particularly, as I mentioned already, we look up on the Security Council to take up on the responsibility of addressing this issue for the sake of helpless children and mothers born out of rape who are scattered all around the globe, all around us. Thank you.
Thank you very much for contributing creatively to our discussion. I would like now to thank all briefers. We accomplished this part of our discussion, and I will open the floor to the members of the Security Council. But allow me first to start with our sponsors and co-sponsors. And in advance, I thank them. So in order, it will be Bolivia, France, and Germany. So the distinguished representative of Bolivia, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. The plurinational state of Bolivia thanks the mission of Poland for their initiative to carry out this important Arria Formula meeting, given that it presents itself as an opportunity to discuss the issue of children born out of sexual violence in conflict zones, an issue that has been overtly neglected and whose impact and consequences must be truly analyzed in order to prevent the stigmatization they must endure, to adequately reintegrate them into their communities and help them move on with their lives so that they can face adulthood and contribute to society with their full potential. Likewise, I would like to thank all the previous briefers, and especially let me thank Evelyn for her moving words. I think it's been very important for us to have a face and a voice given to this very important matter. It will help us see the problem in its real dimension, in its human dimension. So really, thank you for that. Thank you, Evelyn. Madam Chair, we are overwhelmed by the devastating accounts of women and girls who are victims of sexual violence in conflict zones. Not only are they victims of rape, sexual slavery, forced prostitution, sterilization, and other forms of sexual abuse, but their children bear the burden of this suffering with them and are subject to stigmatization throughout their lives. The stigma they suffer is a dreadful expression of a patriarchal system, intensified by conflict situations in which tighten the grip on women and children, which are targeted physically or mentally and deprived of their dignity. This, of course, has a negative impact in the consolidation of peace. Noor, for instance, is a teenage girl in a refugee camp in Bangladesh who is unsure of how old she is. Only her parents knew her age, and both died during the crisis. Her grandparents estimate she is 16 or 18 years old. Her 10-year-old boy, a brother, is alive, but she doesn't see him. Her relatives have decided that he cannot be associated with his sister because of her shame. So he lives with an aunt in a different refugee camp. According to UNICEF, about 40,000 pregnant Rohingya women have given birth or will come to term. And those who are born due to sexual violence are called bad blood or children of the enemy. And they are and will be unfairly tainted by the brutality their mothers suffered and will be subject to dire social, emotional, and economic repercussions. An effective plan of action to grant them nationality and address the root causes of the crisis is needed so that they can have an education and access to health services. Nisreen, a Yazidi woman who was captured by the Islamic State in Iraq, was finally freed last year, but her community and her family refused to take her back with her child, who was born out of a forced marriage with a Muslim. In order to go back, she will have to give up her baby. Thus, some women choose to stay in captivity. However, it is all not bad news. Yazidi spiritual leader Baba Sheikh broke with tradition by instructing the community to welcome her back. Reason why the role of religious leaders play in these circumstances is so important, and why reconciliation and reintegration must be part of a healing process. Reintegration at the United Nations has often been used as part of a process for children who have been associated with armed forces or armed groups, whose objective is to contribute to security and stability in post-conflict environments. In this sense, we feel that the organization should take the good practices and the lessons learned from this part of the DDR processes, given the fact that reintegration focuses on the specific needs of girls and boys, involving the families and the communities, combating stigmatization, and going as far as having traditional healing ceremonies or community reparations. Elements of reintegration include family reunification or alternative care if reunification is impossible, education and training, appropriate strategies for economic and livelihood support, and in some cases, psychological and social support. Hence, we consider that this experience could be subsumed into the situation of children who are born out of sexual violence. Moreover, the main objective of reintegration is to promote reconciliation and acceptance of the child back into the family or local community, and implementing this requires the involvement of the community, which can be achieved with traditional healing mechanisms or through negotiations with community leaders. The working group of children and armed conflict could also request additional information of this issue to the Secretary General, to the representatives of the affected country, and to outside experts, such as civil society and academia. Further, recommendations for additional technical assistance to the country concerned could be requested in order to strengthen its national capacities to promote and protect the rights of children born out of sexual violence. Recommendations could also be made to the relevant bodies, such as OCHA, UNHCR, and UNICEF, for improving humanitarian coordination and assistance to these children. Finally, the Security Council could request that the specific needs of children born out of sexual violence be considered in forthcoming peace processes and agreements, as well as peacekeeping mandates, including through the support of the United Nations Zero Tolerance Policy on all forms of exploitation and sexual abuse, such as the case of Haiti, as well as throughout the consolidation of peace in the aftermath of conflict. We cannot keep neglecting these children. The time to act is now. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Bolivia, and now I give the floor to the representative of France, please.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much. France is honoured to co-sponsor with Poland, Bolivia and Germany today's Arria on the protection due to children born of sexual violence in conflict situations. This cuts across the women, peace and security agenda on the one hand and the children in armed conflict agenda on the other. And we would like to continue to drive this subject forward with the SRSG and UNICEF. I would like to thank all of these speakers for their briefings, and in particular, Evelyn Amony, for having shared her personal experience with us and the challenges she has faced. Your commitment is going to allow us to tackle this subject head-on in the United Nations and the Security Council. Children born of rape in armed conflict are victims, and they are indelibly conflated with criminals at the same time, and this opprobrium can often be even written on their birth certificate. This stigmatization sometimes continues throughout adult life, and this is an intolerable impingement upon the rights of the child and human dignity. These children are rejected by their communities, they face poverty, and they suffer tenacious, indeed irreparable, traumas. They are vulnerable to exploitation and enrollment, recruitment. Dr. Mukwege warned us many times in the United Nations and in the Security Council in different formats that these children suffer from a genuine problem of identity, an existential crisis. Once they have a weapon in their hands, all they see is the pain that they have lived throughout their entire childhood, on the subject of children who are subsequently recruited as child soldiers. And that is why the Security Council must take stock of the scale of this challenge and act. And that's what some organizations have already done, such as the African Union, for example, with the African Union Commission for Human and People's Rights, which has taken this dimension into account in its guidelines on sexual violence. And we would have 4 proposals to make for action. Firstly, mobilizing so that births of children born of rape can be registered without stigmatization or discrimination. In Iraq, a commitment has been made to allow for mothers to transmit their identity to children born of rape. This commitment will provide effective commitment once it is implemented. We also call for birth registration to be facilitated in refugee camps. Secondly, and this is a challenge, we need to combat stigmatization and the rejection of victims of sexual violence and their children. I have, for example, in mind the Yazidi women who dared to return with their children to their communities, and they must be able to rely on lasting support from us. In this respect, we support the Special Representative and UNICEF, who are doing remarkable work with the local communities, including with religious leaders. The third proposal is that in the best interests of the child, victim status must be recognized for these children born of sexual violence. This implies that they will then be able to acquire reparation and benefit from social protection and assistance programs to develop. And this must be taken into account in the context of transitional justice programs and in the context of development assistance. Fourthly, and for us this is essential, it is vital that access for women and girls to sexual and reproductive health services be guaranteed. We must also guarantee sexual and reproductive rights for women and girls everywhere. They must have the right to not become mothers against their will. We call for bolstered cooperation between UNFPA and the Office of the SRSG on this subject. To conclude, respecting the rights of the child and acting in the best interests of the child is what needs to mobilize us and help the Council, in particular with the upcoming anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child. Thank you. I thank the representative of France.
Give the floor to the representative of Germany, please.
Madam Permanent Representative, allow us to begin by thanking Poland for taking the initiative on this topic and for inviting such distinguished panelists today. Your engagement is as invaluable as it is urgently needed. We want to particularly highlight the contribution of civil society speakers, whose expertise should be heard in the Council much more frequently. Germany is honored to co-host this event. It is still too rare that the Council addresses the pressing issues of children in relation to peace and security, and this needs to change. Germany will therefore use its time on the Security Council to be vocal about this. One of our objectives is to highlight the work of the Working Group on Children in Armed Conflict and increase the recognition it deserves. Madam Permanent Representative, we need to recognize that the phenomenon of children born out of sexual violence is widespread in almost all conflicts worldwide. The victims of rape are all too often stigmatized, and tragically, so are the children. This double victimization is not only morally repulsive, but may even destabilize society and perpetuate conflicts, as we've so eloquently heard from the panelists today. One of the objectives in bringing this topic closer to the Security Council must therefore be to provide assurance to survivors of and children born from sexual violence. They're survivors, they're victims, and they need to take an active part in healing processes and in bringing those responsible for sexual violence to account. And the Security Council must address all cases of sexual violence with vigor and take all measures at its disposal to deter such violence and to ensure victims are protected and supported, including through the proper mandating of peace operations. Allow us to offer 3 departure points for the discussion today. First, for Germany, one best practice is a comprehensive human rights-based approach. We must focus on the whole of society to make a difference, while, of course, at the same time, taking into account the rights and needs of the child. Because it is important to realize that the necessary changes need to happen in society so that children and mothers that are otherwise stigmatized or excluded are accepted. The onus here is not on the survivors or their children. 2, we believe it important, as part of a survivor-centric approach, to also focus on the mothers, their access to health care, and are fully committed to the promotion and respect of their sexual and reproductive rights. Third, Germany believes it to be best practice to include the voice of the affected children in decision-making, and we welcome, for example, that the Office of the Special Representative on Children in Armed Conflict has already begun looking at child protection and mediation processes together. In closing, Germany believes that the Security Council can do more. A first step for us will be to use the yearly open debate on conflict-related sexual violence during our first presidency of the Council in April 2019 as an opportunity to further strengthen the Security Council's normative framework on conflict-related sexual violence. We count on your support to include the consideration of children born out of sexual violence there. We also hope to use our co-chairpersonship of the Security Council's informal expert group on women, peace and security to the same effect. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Germany, and now I will open the floor to other statements of the delegations, and I will read the list. We have already the list requested: the Netherlands, Peru, Kuwait, United States, United Kingdom, Hungary, Belgium. So I give the floor to the representative of the Netherlands, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much, and, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank Poland, Bolivia, France, and Germany and the briefers today. And I'd like to specifically mention the courageous intervention of Ms. Evelyn Amony that really, I think, was important for us to hear. And it's very important to give a voice to the children born from sexual violence in conflict. We are also grateful for the recommendations given by the briefers and their call for action. So there is a sense of urgency in addressing this topic as born out of the testimonies we just heard, as well by the Rohingya crisis that demonstrated to us more recently. The Council visit to Myanmar and Bangladesh revealed a picture of large-scale atrocities against minorities in Myanmar, including sexual violence. And many children born of sexual violence find themselves in refugee camps in Bangladesh, and we cannot ignore them. And in the Council, I used the example of the mother who had given birth to a baby, and she didn't know who the father was, as her husband was killed the night she was raped. And the image is something that keeps haunting me every day. Madam Chair, the Kingdom of the Netherlands fully aligns itself with the statement to be made by the European Union later on, and we strongly agree that we must look at the issue of protecting children born from sexual violence in a holistic way. The plight of these children cannot be seen in isolation, and this means that we also need to look at the plight of their mothers and their needs and rights, as Deputy UNICEF also pointed out earlier on today. First of all, we need to help women and girls dealing with trauma and coming to terms with memories of sexual violence or exploitation. Second, we need to address their sexual and reproductive health needs, ranging from maternal care to the screening for and treatment of sexually transmitted infections and HIV. to emergency contraception and access to safe abortion services. And like the French colleagues said, no one can be forced to be a mother. For women and girls to have a choice to access to these services is vital. And thirdly, healing requires accountability and justice to be done. And the fight against sexual violence is a priority for our Security Council membership this year, and we have to ensure that survivors have access to justice and that perpetrators of sexual violence are punished or, if applicable, sanctioned. There can indeed be no peace without justice. Madam Chair, it is hard to only imagine the scale of the problems that children born out of sexual violence are facing. We need sustained attention and we need more reporting. And we must ask ourselves whether we have been able to ensure that the special representatives on women, peace, security, of sexual violence in conflict, and children in armed conflict are appropriately equipped for this. There are lessons to be learned from the Children in Armed Conflict mandate and the role for the Council in stopping violations against children in armed conflict. Its monitoring and reporting mechanism have proven to be a uniquely and effective tool to identify perpetrators and push affected countries to undertake action to prevent further abuse. The Council's resolution adopted on children and armed conflict in July 2018 encouraged member states to focus on long-term and sustainable reintegration and rehabilitation opportunities for children affected by armed conflict. The proposed measures can also help children born of sexual violence and their mothers, psychosocial support, education and livelihood programs, as well as awareness raising and working with communities in order to avoid stigmatization of children born from sexual violence. To conclude, Madam Chair, it's timely to discuss the plight of children born of sexual violence and the plight of their mothers, women, and girls. By ignoring their voices, we're not only allowing their rights to be trampled upon, but we're also planting the seeds for future conflicts. And therefore, we now need to apply the lessons from the past, and we now need to help these children and their mothers in present and future. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the Netherlands, and now I give the floor to the representative of Peru.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I will take the chance that our interpreters' friends are staying in this room until noon. I will speak in my language, Spanish. Quisiera agradecer.
I should like to thank the missions of Poland, Germany, Bolivia, and France for organizing this meeting, which highlights our responsibility to ensure the protection of children born of sexual violence in conflict zones. We also express our gratitude to the invited speakers for their presentations. I would also like to express our particular thanks to Ms. Evelyn Amony for her courage in sharing with us her testimony, her dramatic testimony, as we are with you, Ms. Amony, and with all the women you are representing. We roundly condemn all forms of sexual violence in armed conflict. These must be tackled as threats to international peace and security. We fully believe that the United Nations, and particularly the Security Council, have a very important role to play in preventing this crime. Children born of sexual violence in conflict zones tend to suffer from social stigmatization, abandonment, and even at times infanticide. They are marginalized and rejected by their mothers and families and communities. They represent the memory of events which are full of pain and suffering. Paradoxically, they are often not included in recovery processes post-conflict. Quite the contrary, they are seen as children of the enemy. But this drama also affects women and girls who become mothers as a result of sexual violence in conflict in times of conflict. They have to face challenges in being accepted again by their families and societies. They suffer more stigma than those who return without children. When women survivors and their children born of sexual violence in times of war try to re-establish their lives in their communities, they face continual abuse and victimization, which often worsen over time. There are, however, factors which could help in this process of acceptance and reintegration for the victims. For example, economic empowerment can become a useful tool for building a new identity and a new way of living one's life, and thus occupying a role and a place within families and communities. This must be promoted by states with the support of the international community. It is therefore fundamental to address the socio-cultural and socio-economic factors leading to this problem, so as to seek solutions which can allow us to address the difficult situation faced by children born of sexual violence and their mothers. It is also necessary for the parties involved in conflict to recognize victims who have suffered from sexual violence, so that they can in that way obtain just reparations and reintegration. The same applies to children born of such violations. We must also guarantee that those responsible for these acts of violence be accountable and be brought to justice. We must remove any barriers in the way of investigations and taking such violations and forms of sexual violence to court. The recommendations in the latest report of the Secretary-General on sexual violence in conflict are also indispensable, and states must make every effort to clear up the legal status of children who are conceived as a result of rapes, and the harmful practices of including such in their birth register and on the birth certificates. I should like to conclude by expressing our gratitude to the Ambassador of Poland for organising this meeting on such a very important topic. We also express our recognition and support for the work of the mission of the Special Representative on Sexual Violence in Conflict, the Special Representative for Children in Armed Conflict, and the Special Representative of the Secretary-General on Violence Against Children, as well as underscoring the priority that the Secretary-General attaches to this topic, in line with the need to build sustainable peace. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Peru, and now I give the floor to the representative of Kuwait.
Good evening to all of you at the outset. I would like to express my sincerest thanks to you, the President, the Permanent Representative of Poland, for chairing this important meeting. I also thank Bolivia, France, and Germany for convening this important meeting. I thank all the countries, NGOs, and international organizations, as well as women who provided their experiences regarding the tragedies sustained as a result of sexual violence. At the outset, I would like to clarify that we're meeting to discuss something that is really important, which is protection of children born of sexual violence in conflicts as a result of rape, forced marriage, or slavery. So sexual violence has very harmful impact on the psychological health of victims and their families. And they are victims of social stigmatization. Even after the end of the conflict, this would undermine security and also affects the society cohesion. I would like to highlight 4 important points. First, the impact of sexual violence crimes on victims. They pay the price because those victims and their children are suffering from social stigmatization all the time, and not the soldiers. We also welcome the participation of religious leaders in combating social stigmatization. This social stigma against children denies them their simplest rights, such as the right to development within a healthy family, and some victims abandon their children, which leads to their social marginalization and affects their ability to access basic services such as education and health. And this is an additional challenge for those children, many of whom are suffering from health problems relating to their circumstances and the way they were conceived and born. Third, there should be cooperation, exchange of best practices in empowering the victims of sexual violence to access justice, including integrating them into society and having access to compensation. We welcome the content of the Colombian peace agreements regarding recognition of children born of sexual violence. We also welcome the role of the United Nations in supporting member states to address the challenges relating to sexual violence in conflict, including collective action to empower survivors and to enable them restore their normal life, including joint communique among the member states and the Office of the Special Envoy on Sexual Violence. An example of that was cited by the representative of Iraq. We also welcome the decision of the Special representative on sexual violence. She has launched a research regarding the situation of children born of rape. This will be a better example for the future, following the visit to Bosnia and Herzegovina to participate in launching the national initiative on social stigma. We cannot discuss the issue of children born of rape in conflict areas without addressing the issue of impunity. Given that sexual violence is used as a war tactic and a means of terrorism, in some cases these practices amount to ethnic cleansing when a segment or a group is targeted based on their ethnic or religious affiliation. We support the role of the investigation team to hold to account Daesh for their perpetrations in Iraq that was established in accordance with Security Council Resolution 2379. We also thank the UN Independent Commission on Myanmar for their report on what happened in Myanmar, and we welcome their briefing in the Security Council two days ago. And this is a good step to help the international community achieve accountability. We look forward to the Security Council assuming its due role in maintaining international peace and security. In closing, children born of sexual violence have a sin that they did not commit, and we as international community have a moral responsibility to protect those innocent children and their right to live in a family and peaceful environment so that no child is born as a victim and bearing a sin that he or she did not commit. Thank you, Madam President.
Give the floor to the representative of the United States, please.
Thank you. I especially want to thank our briefers today for their excellent work on the ground. I appreciate Poland very much convening this important session at this important time. And like many of my colleagues today, I want to extend a special thanks to Evelyn and Momen for sharing your story and for the important work that you are doing to restore the lives of victims. We couldn't be more honored to have you here speaking with us today. And I agree with my colleagues who have said that we need to have more voices from the ground to help remind us why the work that we do here, which often becomes very detached from the reality on the ground and descends into arguing about commas and periods. And we often forget that we are talking about the real lives of real people who are affected by these conflicts. So thank you for reminding us. Imagine being a Colombian boy whose middle name is Colonel, because that's the rank of the man who raped his mother. Imagine being a girl born in Iraq to a Yazidi mother who was a sex slave to an ISIS father, born without documentation of her birth and with questions about her religion and identity. Imagine being a Somali child ostracized by her grandparents and cast away along with her young mother, who was practically a child herself. Imagine the bleak future of the children of rape born in the Rohingya refugee camps to young girls whose lives have been destroyed by sexual violence. None of these children has a normal childhood. Often with their mothers, they are ostracized, stigmatized, and marginalized, continually re-victimized for the crimes that led to their very existence. Sexual violence in conflict is a criminal matter, but it is also a security issue for all of us because it reinforces conflict and instability. Boko Haram and ISIS are among the major non-state perpetrators of conflict-related sexual violence and of the legacy of a new generation of children born of rape. By mere circumstance of their birth, they risk statelessness and limited futures. As we have discussed in the Global Coalition to Defeat ISIS, this vulnerable population could be recruited or even raised by violent extremist organizations. We can end this cycle by taking action to restore the dignity of these children and their mothers and offer an alternative path toward justice and opportunity. Lack of birth registration and legal documentation can increase the risk of statelessness and other vulnerabilities for children born of sexual violence. Without such identity documents, access to health care, education, and community support networks is limited. This bodes poorly for their future, particularly in communities that are already struggling with the effects of conflict. These children may also face heightened risks of child early and forced marriage, child labor, family separation, trafficking in persons, recruitment into criminal and violent extremist groups, and other forms of exploitation and abuse that have implications for years to come. Providing protection, documentation, and support networks to children born as a result of sexual violence in conflict, as well as their mothers and families, can help prevent future security issues. Such support is essential to reducing risk and integrating children born of rape and their mothers back into their communities and societies. In turn, we should promote sustainable solutions that increase community resilience. The United States strongly supports the I Belong campaign to end statelessness and the UN High Commissioner for Refugees mandate to prevent and reduce statelessness. This includes efforts to ensure birth registration and remove discrimination in nationality laws that prohibit women from transmitting nationality to their children on an equal basis with men. In places like Iraq, this also means advocating for changes to personal status laws so that a child's name does not become a cause for ostracism and so that women can transmit religious affiliation to their children. We welcome efforts by Bangladesh to address the challenges faced by Rohingya women and their children born in the camps and stand ready to provide additional support to them. Through $15 million in efforts this year, we are supporting women and girls at risk of violent extremism, including survivors of sexual violence and their children, as well as women leaders who are standing up to prevent terrorism and combat sexual violence in their communities. The United States is also redoubling its efforts to empower women as leaders in preventing conflict in the first place. Women's meaningful participation in security initiatives leads to better outcomes. Through the Women, Peace, and Security Act signed by President Trump last year, we are exploring innovative approaches to ensure that more women are involved in preventing and responding to conflict than ever before. Late last year, I met with an American obstetric nurse who had just returned from working for an international NGO as part of what was then still the emergency response to the Rohingya refugee crisis. She sat in my office describing an epidemic of dangerous self-termination of unwanted pregnancies, an unprecedented situation where for every healthy, normal pregnancy her organization was seeing in the women's health clinics, they were seeing an early termination, an unsafe self-induced abortion, unsafe home remedies to eliminate a pregnancy, and other efforts by desperate young women and their families, a 1-to-1 ratio of healthy pregnancies to terminated pregnancies. This was something she had never seen in her years of working in some of the most desperate conflict and refugee situations in the world. She was utterly traumatized by what she had seen in the camps. This cycle of violence, stigmatization, and hopelessness can only be stopped when would-be perpetrators know there will be accountability for these violations. We look forward to working with our council colleagues to strengthen accountability for sexual violence and conflict and the use of rape as a weapon of war.
and call on all council members to recognize the particular responsibility we bear in preventing, punishing, and ending these horrific abuses. Thank you.
I thank the representative of US, and now I give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom, please.
Thank you very much, and thank you to Poland for organising this very important Arria. We've heard some really excellent briefers today and heard some many very strong policy proposals from member states. Like others, I want to pay particular tribute to Evelyn Amony. I have huge respect for your bravery, for the work that you are doing to help children and mothers, and also for the incredible eloquence with which you addressed the Security Council today. As others have said, I think there is a responsibility for us as council members and UN member states to live up to the responsibility we have to match your words and your inspiration with concrete actions. I think arias like this one have an impact in the real world when all of us do things differently when we walk away from them. So I want to contribute to that by making 5 modest proposals in addition to the other proposals that have been made for what we might do differently. Very briefly, first, I think that more UN assistance and more bilateral member state assistance on sexual violence, whether it's in DDR processes or SSR or judicial reform, needs to include assistance on this specific issue. And I think not enough does at the moment. Second, we must do much more to encourage governments to ensure that children born of sexual violence and conflict are given citizenship and full rights. I was very interested in the proposal by the Bangladeshi representative and mentioned by the SRSG about an international normative framework. I think that's something we should pursue. I also kicked myself under the table when it was mentioned that the DRC was a priority case on this issue, because many of us around this table have just come back from the DRC, and regrettably, we did not mention it when we met the DRC authorities, and we should have done. So I'd like to suggest that maybe we as a council follow up that visit by writing to the DRC authorities on this particular issue. Third, I think when it comes to peacekeeping, we need to make sure that our peacekeepers are aware of this issue and aware of the distinct needs of children born out of sexual violence and also the needs of their families. So we need to integrate that into the training that all of us do for peacekeepers. Fourth, we need to ensure that this issue is built into the Council's work, into our Security Council resolutions, and into the terms of reference for the visits that we do as a council to countries like the DRC, Burma and Bangladesh. And then fifth and finally, I completely agree with the SRSG's point about how we mustn't allow data or the lack of data to be a barrier for action. Completely agree with that. But at the same time, we think it would be useful and valuable for the UN to lead a global study on this issue, focusing on the identification in all relevant countries of the risks, of the harm and the challenges facing children born out of sexual violence and conflict. Thank you.
Thank you very much, UK. Now forgive me to mention that we have to follow the order, and first the members of the Security Council will speak, and I have an interest for taking the floor. So I have on the list Russian Federation, China, Cote d'Ivoire, Equatorial Guinea, Ethiopia, Kazakhstan, Belgium, Hungary, and European Union. This will be the order. And Estonia as well, yes. So I give the floor to the Russian Federation now, please.
Thank you, Madam President. The problem that's been set by our colleagues and the distinguished panelists is a complex one, and is something of a challenge for the UN Security Council. We are grateful for the statements that we've heard, which help to shed light on the scale of the problem in question and outline possible actions that can be taken. We would like to confirm that our wish that we would like to express. We would like to express to the victims of these terrible crimes that everything needs to be done to defend the rights of those who have suffered. At the same time, having listened to those who have spoken, we have noted that the problem of children born as a result of sexual violence in conflict-affected countries largely has a human rights dimension and goes beyond the prerogatives of the UN Security Council, which pertain to the maintenance of peace and security. The problems of preventing statelessness, increasing a culture of tolerance in society, ensuring access to education and medical assistance, guaranteeing the right to housing, protecting mothers, and ensuring the necessary level of economic well-being. All of these clearly go beyond the mandate of the Security Council and pertain to the purview of other UN system entities. We share the point of view that, in the absence of an effective solution to the aforementioned problems, there will be a heightened risk of these unfortunate children who have been excluded from society falling into the hands of human traffickers, terrorists, and organized crime. And that must be prevented. At the same time, we do not see strong grounds for asserting that the problem of children is a factor that undermines peace and security, which would require an intervention from the Security Council. The question of the situation of children born as a result of sexual violence must continue to be the subject of broad study from experts, government structures of various sorts, non-governmental organizations, for the timely adoption of measures to improve the lot of children, their mothers, their families, by the corresponding state and relevant international structures that work on the protection of the rights of children and their development. We express an appeal to those relevant specialized UN system organizations to maintain their efforts to protect the rights of children and to continue working in that direction, and to produce timely reports about their proposals to the UN General Assembly and the Security Council where necessary. As for the problem of sexual violence in conflicts in general, then of course that should continue to be the focus of the Security Council's attention. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Russian Federation, and now I give the floor to the representative of China.
Do we still have interpretation? Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank all the briefers for your introductions and presentations. The children born out of war and violent conflicts is a very complex. Problem. This is a very complicated social problem. I would like to mention 3 points. First, from the point of Security Council, we need to do our maximum to prevent and resolve conflicts. This is the fundamental course of action to stop all kinds of tragedies. Second, we support country governments in question to protect the victims, and we support them to adopt remedial measures and other measures to help these people. Third, regarding accountability, we know this has a very complicated legal background. We think accountability should be done according to law and should be based on credible evidence and procedures, but not based on simple political accusation. On one hand, we understand these victims, women and children, they have a very tragic situation. At the same time, we also need to be prudent in our work. In accusation, we need to have evidence, hard evidence. From the point of Security Council, whether it's for a country or from a thematic perspective, we have reflected all these issues in the relevant resolutions. And this expresses the consensus from the Security Council. We hope these resolutions can actually be implemented effectively. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of China, and I give the floor to the representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I would like to thank the co-organisers of this meeting, Poland, Bolivia, France, Germany and South Africa, as well as the panelists who have given us an opportunity to consider one of the consequences of sexual violence committed in areas of armed conflict, namely the question of protecting children born of sexual violence. Madam Chair, the complexity of the matter of sexual violence committed in armed conflict was very quickly perceived by the United Nations, which deploys peacekeeping operations in conflict-affected areas. This realization became concrete in October 2000 with the Resolution 1325 of the Security Council on Women, Peace and Security. Various resolutions concerning other dimensions of this matter were subsequently adopted, and the Secretary-General appointed a special representative to ensure that the phenomenon is better taken account of. In spite of the efforts of the international community that should be applauded and encouraged, the situation of children born in this context of sexual violence committed in armed conflict continues to be a subject of major concern, and this both in their social backgrounds and settings and also for the public authorities. Madam Chair, although considered as a criminal act by the relevant resolutions of the Security Council, acts of sexual violence continue to be perpetrated in periods of armed conflict, and the various reports of the Secretary-General regularly refer to this. From these non-consensual relations which we condemn, children are born whose very existence is sometimes questioned. Some societies systematically deny the right to life to children born in this context. They consequently do everything they can to physically eliminate them immediately following their birth. When these children escape this practice, they still face rejection by their families, the families which are supposed to first and foremost guarantee their protection. In this context, the first actions to be taken to protect them must be aimed at raising awareness in and educating society above all on the subject of the right to life. Awareness raising must also place particular emphasis on women when they give birth being able to go to health centres that are equipped to record births and then notify that to the civil and administrative authorities. Madam Chair, the protection and promotion of the rights of the child is first and foremost something that falls under the competency of the public authorities. Here, the lessons learned from the experiences of Colombia, Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Uganda when it comes to protecting children born of sexual violence committed in armed conflict will contribute to building a more effective multidimensional system, which can take into account the humanitarian, religious, cultural, administrative, and above all judicial aspects of this problem. Manifest political will is needed in this process. And in this protection system, the state needs to play a heightened role by establishing structures to take in and care for children that are marginalized or rejected by their families. Ultimately, these children could be declared wards of the state. Thank you, Madam Chair. I thank the representative of Côte d'Ivoire.
I give the floor to the representative of Equatorial Guinea.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Permítame ante todo.
Allow me at the outset to express our gratitude to Poland, Bolivia, France, Germany, and South Africa for organizing this meeting, which is of such great importance. We welcome the work being done in the United Nations on the protection of children and the very active role played in this regard by the Security Council and its working group on children and armed conflict. Madam Chair, sexual violence and exploitation are endemic in regions affected by war, and children are often born as a result. It is estimated that tens of thousands of children have been born as a result of sexual exploitation in times of war over the last decade alone. Children born out of war are profoundly affected by the social upheaval which led to their conception and by their treatment by society based upon their biological origins. These children are one of the most vulnerable sectors of the larger group of children affected by war. They face deprivation, violence, and insecurity. In post-conflict situations, war babies may be deprived of their fundamental human rights, such as that to survival, the right to be protected against stigmatization and discrimination, the right to a nationality, family, and identity. They may face specific health risks due to the circumstances of their birth, and the psychosocial trauma of their mothers may affect their early childhood development. Moreover, due to their identities, they may be politicized by various state and non-state actors in post-conflict situations. It cannot simply be assumed that decisions made about their care will always be made in their best interests. The shared experience of these children is that societies they are born into perceive them as stigmatized and as illegitimate children and enemies. Their human rights may be compromised in various ways, including rejection, abuse, or neglect by members of their immediate and extended families, as well as stigmatization by the community in general, a lack of access to resources, and negation of their citizenship. In all these ways, physical, economic, and psychosocial, war and post-conflict situations affect this category of children in particular. However, so far, their vulnerabilities and specific needs have been overlooked to a large extent by the international network of human rights organizations, which seek to protect children during and after armed conflicts. We must not remain silent on this topic. We have a moral obligation to protect and assist children throughout the world, including children born during conflict situations. It is necessary to carry out monitoring of data collection, political recommendations, and assessment reports on best practices. We therefore encourage member states and governments to guarantee that children born of violence grow up with dignity, with an official legal status, so as not to be perpetually marginalized and stigmatized. We also encourage member states to continue ensuring that particular attention is paid to children affected by armed conflicts when implementing the Sustainable Development Goals. since these are crucial and contribute to bringing an end to abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all forms of violence against children. To conclude, we call upon Member States to promote significant participation and active consultation of children and young people, and particularly girls, through education, leadership skills, and safe spaces and support networks to allow them to become agents for change within their communities. Sharing best practices with regard to the effective participation by youth leaders in government, networks of girls, and the Group for the Defence of Young People in policy programming is also important. Thank you.
Thank the representative of Equatorial Guinea, and now I give the floor to Ethiopia, please.
Thank you very much, and I'll join others in thanking you and others, the co-sponsors of this meeting, for organizing it. We recognize the challenge faced by children born of sexual and gender-based violence in conflict zones. We have listened to the testimonies of the victim, Ms. Evelyn, which clearly indicates that women and girls and children, what children go through in conflict and post-conflict situation, the trauma that they go through. I'll be brief. The first point that I wanted to highlight is the priority that needs to be given. Priority, in our view, should be given to addressing the root causes of conflict, and this is something which we have highlighted in the previous Arria formula, which was organized this week on sexual violence. Addressing the root causes is important in responding to the protection challenge faced by women and girls in conflict and post-conflict situation. And this would require the Council to focus on the following issues. The first one, again, more focus on prevention. I think some colleagues who spoke before me have highlighted this. More focus on prevention and addressing the protection challenge in conflict and post-conflict situation should be one of the priorities from the Council. And the second point that I wanted to highlight is something which my colleague from the UK have touched upon in relation to peacekeeping. We just wanted to add the following. Where the Council has given a mandate to peacekeeping missions with the protection of civilians, where there is a POC mandate for peacekeepers, the Council needs to ensure that they have the necessary capabilities, and this is something which we have also highlighted this week. They need to have the necessary capabilities, as well as there is a need to create conditions that will enable them to fully implement their protection of civilians mandate. And this, in a way, would contribute to the prevention agenda and address the protection challenge, which usually girls and women are faced in conflict and post-conflict situation. And the second point that I wanted to highlight is in post-conflict situation, the provision of assistance and ensuring the rehabilitation of victims of sexual and gender-based violence and children born out of sexual violence in conflict zones require a discussion beyond the Council in various fora. Discussion beyond the Council in different forums could focus, among others, on provision of assistance and ensuring accountability. And all this requires close cooperation and collaboration with regional and sub-regional organizations. And I wanted to mention the role of, for instance, the role of African Union, the need for closer cooperation with regional organizations such as the African Union beyond the Council. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Ethiopia, and now I give the floor to the representative of Kazakhstan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Kazakhstan joins others in thanking the delegation of Poland, as well as Bolivia, France, and Germany for convening this meeting and for raising awareness on the plight of children born of sexual violence. I also thank our briefers for their moving and thoughtful statements. I wish to commend the SRSG Patten, her team, and civil society representatives for their tireless work to address this important issue. The children born of rape and their mothers face extreme difficulties in their societies, including stigma, isolation, rejection from their families and communities, increased risk of physical abuse and harassment. They usually are deprived from economic resources and social identity. We therefore believe that they require special attention, support, and protection. To address this issue, we need a comprehensive approach that includes improving their access to justice, identity documents, social services, medical care, education, and livelihood opportunities. There is a need for a social transformation involving the state, communities, judiciary, and educational systems. Social change efforts should include awareness raising, community mobilization, and capacity building of specialists to provide psychosocial support for rape victims and children born of rape. It is also critical to focus on reducing the level of sexual violence. We have a robust normative framework for sexual violence in conflict, and we need to better implement it. Financial and technical support to member states that bear the primary responsibility, as well as cooperation with religious leaders, civil society, and local community leaders is also critical in improving the situation. The need to elaborate the global framework and to conduct a study was noted today by some speakers. This was Bangladesh, I think, and UK, and maybe some other speakers. Our country stands ready to support any multilateral efforts to address this issue, and we believe that these efforts will require coordinated efforts of all the relevant UN structures and organizations, and there should be a proper division of labor between the UN bodies. In this regard, we would like to ask the briefers what, in your opinion, should be the role of the Security Council in this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I give the floor to the representative of Hungary, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Ambassador, Madam Chair, honorable members of the Security Council, dear colleagues. The issue we address today is tragically a long-standing challenge. Children have been born from conflict-related sexual violence throughout centuries, throughout human history, and in all parts of the world, and in my country as well. We in Hungary just remember very well these times. However, this is the first time that this issue is specifically addressed in the context of the Security Council, and we are deeply grateful for Poland, Bolivia, France, and Germany for this breakthrough. Hungary strongly condemns the widespread and growing use of sexual violence in armed conflict, which is often used purposefully as a tactic of war and terrorism, and the multifaceted strategy to humiliate women, children, and men, break down families, displace and dismantle communities, and shatter societies. All efforts to address stigmatization should be human rights-based, survivor-centered, gender and age-sensitive, and specific to the type of exploitation endured. To fight the perpetrator strategy and foster social reintegration of survivors of rape and the children, we must take a holistic approach and assist families and communities in transforming perceptions and attitudes through an effective cooperation among states, religious and traditional leaders, and the local community. Madam Chair, a supportive environment may open an opportunity for survivors to come forward and report, which could contribute to ending the culture of impunity and strengthening the overall resilience of societies. Children born of rape, including children born in captivity, are too often exposed to threats to their lives. Infanticide, abandon, neglect, abuse, and rejection, including by their families and communities, and even if they survive, they will have to face cross-generational social and economic marginalization. These children should be treated and protected and as victims, we believe. States should ensure that domestic law and policies guarantee children's legal recognition for the purposes of official documentation and registration, including birth registration without the requirement of naming one or either parent. In order to avoid statelessness, it is paramount to grant these children citizenship, including through their mothers. Furthermore, we need to ensure comprehensive victim-centered, cost-free services to survivors of rape and their children born, including physical treatment and psychological care, while providing effective remedies for social and economic justice and harbor them from the impacts of stigma throughout the journey of recovery, reintegration, rehabilitation, and the follow-up. Hungary aligns itself with a statement by the European Union. I thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I thank the representative of Hungary. Now I should inform you that the interpreters kindly accepted to assist us now, so I think we cannot expect the translation later on. So this is a piece of information. Now I give the floor to the representative of Belgium, the upcoming new member of the Security Council.
Thank you very much. And like others before me, I would like to thank the briefers and especially also Evelyn for sharing her story. It's very important for us to hear real life stories. Also, as Belgium, we would like, of course, to align ourselves with the intervention of the EU later on. And the topic we're discussing today is actually at the intersection of two Security Council mandates. On the one hand, children in conflict, on the other hand, sexual violence in conflict. And it's an advantage and a disadvantage. The advantage is you can look at it and approach it from different angles, institutionally and from a content angle. It can also be a disadvantage. The risk might be that it's looked over, and we would like to thank Poland and Germany, France and Bolivia for organizing this area to look at it and to look at all the facets in a holistic way. But that being said, this issue, of course, has already been addressed by both SRG on sexual violence and conflict and children armed conflict, and we want to commend their work in this field. For us, Belgium, this issue is both a human rights issue, but also a peace and security issue, especially looked at it from sustainable peace. As was being said by others, we need to avoid that children born out of rape and their mothers are 2 times a victim, and that they're stigmatized and discriminated and excluded from their communities. We need to take both legal and administrative measures. Like so many have mentioned, birth registration is very important, citizenship rights, and in terms of more policy measures, programs of reintegration are very important. And I want to also refer to the French and the Dutch interventions with regard to who stress the importance of sexual and reproductive health and rights. Also for Belgium, this is an issue which cannot be overlooked when looking at the reintegration. Also psychosocial support, mental health issues, awareness raising to avoid stigmatization, to work with communities as part of transitional justice programs. We thank the work of both the SRG on Children conflict and the SRG on sexual violence conflict, Madam Patten, for the work you've done, and we encourage you to continue to join efforts, and you have our full support when we'll be on the Security Council. This is an issue which we will pay due attention to. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of Belgium. And now I give the floor to the representative of the European Union, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I would like to thank Poland as well as Germany, Bolivia, and France for organizing this important Arria session. Special thanks to all the briefers, especially to Ms. Evelyn Amony for her moving testimony. And also special thanks to the Special Representative, Ms. Pramila Patten, and her excellent team for all her work and personal commitment. Discussions like the Arria discussion today make us painfully aware that while gender equality is increasingly in the global spotlight, we still have too many blind spots. The effects of conflict-related sexual violence are devastating for women, children, families, and whole communities. They echo across generations as children and their parents suffer from trauma, from stigma, from toxic stress, poverty, poor health, and unwanted pregnancies, and they are further compounded by lack of legal identities, nationality, citizenship, names, and surnames. The European Union has in place a robust policy framework that includes the guidelines on children in armed conflict and on women, peace and security. However, while policies are important, the effective implementation is all that matters. And we do know it is not enough to react only to violations. We need to strengthen the entire system and first and foremost to prevent and protect. Last year, the European Union has allocated nearly 22 million euros in humanitarian aid in various projects addressing and preventing gender-based violence worldwide, and we have been holding the leadership of the call to action on protection from gender-based violence in emergencies, a multi-stakeholder global initiative that aims fundamentally to transform the way that gender-based violence is addressed in humanitarian emergencies through collective action. We have four main priorities in this respect: advocacy, focus on prevention, implementation and monitoring, and work on the ground. And we have also reinforced our zero tolerance policy on sexual exploitation and abuse for such crimes perpetrated by our own staff deployed in missions abroad. We engage in a comprehensive range of projects to provide assistance to children in conflict situations. In Uganda, we have helped South Sudanese children to access to psychosocial support and trauma treatment. In DRC, we have provided support to children affected by ongoing conflict and displacement to get back to school. In Syria, in addition to the efforts to bring children back to education, we also support activities to assist unaccompanied children and children separated from their families by providing shelter, protection, and reintegration into their families or alternative care. In the areas where our civilian and military missions and operations are operating, the European Union is supporting 43 multi-year projects for an amount of more than 43 million euros and 2 relevant multi-country projects of more than 8.5 million to prevent and address sexual violence. Madam Chair, peace is not a self-serving purpose, and our efforts will mean little if it does not translate into a better life for the next generations, and our care starts with the proper protection of the children of a lesser God, who feel helpless and unwanted by their own families, their communities, and even by their own mothers. So the international community has a moral obligation to defend and protect them, and therefore the Security Council has a cardinal role to play in this regard. The European Union stands ready to assist in these efforts. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the European Union, and now I give the floor to the representative of Estonia, please.
I thank you, Madam Chair. First, I align with the European Union statement just delivered. I would like to thank Poland for bringing this highly relevant and complex topic to the attention of the Security Council, and we would also like to thank the highly respected speakers for their earlier statements, especially Evelyn for bringing perspective and real-life experience on the table. Madam Chair, the children living on the margins of society are often much more vulnerable to recruitment, radicalization, trafficking, and exploitation, thus contributing to the perpetuation of cycle of violence. In order to do the opposite and build peaceful and resilient societies in the aftermath of violence and conflict, we need to take the following steps. First, we can only bring a change if we will be able to change the perception of social norms related to stigmatization of children born of war. This can be done in addressing this issue on the highest level possible, internationally and more so domestically, by condemning in strongest terms the discrimination of children based on all grounds, in particular of children born out of sexual violence in conflict. Secondly, we need to guarantee by law that the rights of the child are respected as enshrined in the Convention of the Rights of the Child everywhere and for every child in the world. States should take all measures to ensure that the child is protected against all forms of discrimination or punishment on the basis of the status, activities, opinions, or beliefs of the child's parents, legal guardians, or family members. We also need to ensure that children born of sexual violence are treated equally as to the recognition by the state concerning citizenship and documentation. In every consideration, the best interest of a particular child should remain a priority. To conclude, let me use this opportunity to stress the need to do more to prevent the horrendous crime of conflict-related sexual violence and to hold perpetrators accountable. We also need to pay special attention to the victims of sexual violence and guarantee them sexual and reproductive health and rights without discrimination and psychological support. Estonia has supported many projects to help the victims. We would like to also commend the SRSG on sexual violence in conflict and ensure our full support, including financial support, to your mandate. Moreover, we would like to encourage strengthening further cooperation of your office with UNICEF for the protection of children born of sexual violence in conflict zones. I thank you.
Thank the representative of Estonia. You have been our last speaker on the list. Allow me now to thank our distinguished briefers, distinguished panelists, but also I would like to thank all member states for a very valuable contribution. I think we just started the discussion and Poland at least is ready to continue to bring this issue further in the future to our priorities in the Security Council. Particularly, I would like again to thank Special Representative for being with us, the representatives, of course, of UNICEF, our dear colleagues from Iraq and Bangladesh, but not finally distinguished guests from Colombia and from Uganda. Thank you for your translation as well. You are now heroes of our panel, so I hope by this support, at least our full support, we can encourage you to continue your activities and to be even more courageous. Thank you very much. And again, I appreciate your participation and your presence today. Thank you.